The war between Russia and Ukraine has been going on for months now. The death toll keeps increasing, and the amount of damage done to Ukraine looks a more and more daunting task to ever fix. There's been lots of talk about the methods through which Russia justifies invasion and how it goes about trying to achieve victory. But under all the chatter, it is forgotten why Russia is actually investing so much into taking over their smaller neighbor. Here, we are going to look at some of the most important and interesting reasons that have caused Russia to act in such an erratic and aggressive manner. Reason number 1. Russia desperately needs more people. One of the simplest reasons is that Ukraine is a relatively populous country, at least in terms of density. Having said that, any country has a dense population by comparison to Russia. Moscow is a country that has just as much snowy desert as human civilization. The sparsity of Russia has been a problem that its leaders have struggled with for centuries. It was one of the key reasons that groups of people were moved around so much during the Soviet Union. And in the modern age, this issue has in some ways grown even more pressing for the Russian state. Russia's problem with population growth is going to become only more and more desperate as the living standards slowly increase in the long term. It's a general rule in all countries that as living standards increase, people have fewer babies. In less sparsely populated countries, this is a situation that needs to be navigated, but it isn't usually disastrous. Except in Russia. The vast land of Russia that already has problems in this area, any decline in birth rate becomes much more intimidating. Ukraine offers fertile land, which contrasts steeply with the Arctic deserts that take up so much of Russia. This land can be used for productive purposes and to support population growth. When looking at a map of the two countries, it's easy to make the mistake of thinking that Russia is incomparably larger than Ukraine. However, Russia's population is actually only about 3.5 times bigger than Ukraine's. Especially when you consider the higher rates of education in Ukraine. Adding such a chunk of people into Russia is understandably tempting for the Russian government. It wouldn't expand just the quantity of citizens for the country, but also the quality thanks to the knowledge, expertise, and culture that could be integrated. Reason number 2. Ukraine has lots of natural resources. It's not just the fertile land perfect for growing crops that makes Ukraine such a valuable piece of territory for snagging resource-wise. There are many other coveted natural resources in Ukraine that make it one of the most prized parts of Eastern Europe. Out of the 129 known types of materials, 117 of them can be found in Ukraine. This means that Ukraine is among the world's top extractors for crucial metals like iron, manganese, titanium, gallium, and germanium. Gallium especially constitutes a large chunk of what makes Ukraine so valuable. It is used in all sorts of important things, such as mobile phones, LEDs, and pressure sensors. Despite Ukraine's relative size, it is the second largest extractor of this metal in the world, only behind China. It's also an important extractor of coal, graphite, zirconium silicate, and kaolin. In the years leading up to the invasion, the Ukrainian government was putting more and more of an effort into increasing the extraction of these crucial resources. Unfortunately for Kiev, Moscow also noticed just how much value was in Ukraine, which played a big part in the eventual invasion. Reason number 3. Russia would have better sea access. Glancing at a map, it's easy to think that Russia is surrounded by ocean, and so can trade with the rest of the world easily. However, most of the sea to the north is almost completely unnavigable throughout most of the year due to it freezing over. This makes trading in large volumes with Europe expensive and inefficient. Trains and lorries are just nowhere near as effective as moving goods by ship. If Russia wants to trade with Europe by ship for most months of the year, then its vessels must travel all around the south of Asia and come through the Suez Canal. Needless to say, Russia would prefer a faster route reaching Europe, as well as West Africa and possibly even parts of the Eastern Pacific. At the end of the day, the aim is to have access to the Mediterranean Sea, which has made countless countries rich over the course of centuries. From Russia and Ukraine's perspectives, the best way to get to the Mediterranean Sea is via the Black Sea. Currently, Russia has a small amount of coastline on the Black Sea, but from Moscow's paranoid point of view, this could close up if NATO were to take an aggressive stance. This would devastate the Russian economy, as they would be cut off from efficiently trading with much of Europe, North Africa, and West Africa. However, if Russia were to be in control of Ukraine's coastline on the Black Sea, this would give them far more breathing room for continuing and possibly expanding the volume of their trade through the region. This is undoubtedly a long-term strategy. Most of the valuable trade through the channel is with Europe. Conversely, much of Europe has sanctioned vast parts of the Russian economy due to the invasion. So, Russia knows that gaining this foothold in the Black Sea isn't going to create a short-term bump to their trade balance through the Mediterranean. It is a tactic with an eye to the future, though. If Ukraine were to be captured by Russia, Moscow's next step would be to start normalizing relations with Europe so that it could then start benefiting from the improved trade routes through the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. This is why Moscow has been so eager to placate Turkey, even while it has been so happy to give the rest of NATO the middle finger. For a vessel to travel from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, it must be accepted through the key Turkish port close to Istanbul. If Russia doesn't keep Turkey on side, then its whole coastline will be wasted altogether, as trading ships will be stuck in the Black Sea permanently. Reason number 4. Russia would increase their production capacity. If things were to work out perfectly for Russia and they conquered Ukraine, then it would gain access to the Black Sea coastline, a way of trading from it, and an increase in the total number of goods that could be put on this new conveyor belt. A large part of this increase would come from Russia taking hold of the factories and infrastructure in Ukraine, as well as the resources. Currently, Russia's domestic economy is in no state to capitalize on any influx of resources that could come from a successful invasion. Therefore, to jumpstart any potential growth after any future ceasefire, Russia will have to lean heavily on the available industry in Ukraine. Of course, Putin must be careful not to destroy the trophy it's so desperately chasing. What use is there of being in charge of industrial areas if they have been bombed to rubble? Spending billions of dollars on an invasion of areas that you destroy in the process makes absolutely no sense at all. Therefore, it is crucial not just for the safety of Russians and the future of a potentially sovereign Ukrainian economy, but also for Russia's future growth, that they start taking a less destructive approach to the conflict. If they continue to destroy every factory that they can get in range of like they did in Mariupol, then they will not only have no infrastructure to use their new resources, but they will also be laden with debt from trying to finance the rebuilding. Make no mistake, at the beginning of the war, Ukraine's industrial density was far more impressive than Russia's. However, for every neighborhood that is destroyed and every industrial estate that is turned to rubble, Russia makes its own prize less and less valuable. Reason number 5. Create a buffer against NATO. But the most important reason for the Russian invasion of Ukraine is to create a buffer area for the perceived encroachment of NATO. Many in Russia firmly believe after the fall of the Soviet Union that the West didn't intend to expand NATO 1 inch to the east. Whilst there is no official documentation of Western governments advocating this, it is a hope that many in Russia have been leaning on for decades now. As time has gone on, more and more European countries are signing up to join NATO, neighboring Russia. In a land so vast, Russia's defensive tactic through the ages has been to create large buffer zones that could be fallen back on in times of invasion. To be fair to the country, this has worked time and time again, as revered generals and powerful leaders have repeatedly failed to conquer the far end of Europe. Russia sees more countries joining NATO as the whittling away of that breathing space. It's no secret there is long-lasting tension between Russia and the American-led West. Many paranoid minds in Moscow see the situation as the world's most powerful army, and a notoriously aggressive one at that, inching closer and closer to Russian borders. Now, Russia is a country with a proud military tradition. Given the option between sitting back and waiting for their enemies' borders to expand to them, or pushing Russia's boundaries out preemptively to meet the oncoming invaders, Moscow is always going to choose the expansionist approach. Ukraine represents what is essentially the last bit of significant land up for grabs between the two huge military forces of the East and West. It's not just up for grabs in terms of territory, but also in terms of its internal ideology. Just 10 years ago, it looked like Ukraine was ready to declare itself a permanent ally of Russia. When things in Kiev rapidly U-turned, Russia saw that the contest had moved from parliament to the battlefield and didn't need much of an excuse to get the aggression started. Russia likes to say in its propaganda that the reason for the invasion is genocide prevention and denazification. But anyone who knows the history of the Russian government can see that this excuse is a lie and complete BS. It does nothing about its own Nazi problem and has repeatedly mistreated its own minority groups. What Russia really cares about is the battle for land with what it sees as its staunch nemesis, NATO. It's not so important to Moscow how people are treated in those territories as long as it can get its hands on them before its enemies do. Battles between the West and Russia are hardly anything new. Changing technologies and governments do give the current situation some unique intricacies, but the fundamental conflict is not hugely dissimilar from what happened in Napoleon's time or what happened during the 1940s. Unfortunately for the people who live there, Eastern Europe is a centuries-old battlefield that is consistently fought over by powers to its east and west, and at some point in history, even powers in the Middle East. You'd have hoped in this modern age of supposed civilization, governments would have finally gotten over this ridiculous peeing contest. Unfortunately for the people of Ukraine, though, Russia just can't seem to help itself.